You're listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by the National Association of Convenience Stores.
Welcome to Convenience Matters. This is Jeff Leonard with the National Association of Convenience Stores, and we are going to talk about things that matter to convenience stores. And if they matter to convenience stores, they probably matter to their customers who are in stores every other day.
And I'm John Eichberg with the Fuels Institute at NACS. And Jeff, you're right. 160 million Americans, half of the country, go to a convenience store every single day. So anything you need to fuel your life, fuel your car, fuel your body, you can pick up at a convenience store 365 days of the year.
Speaking of fueling every day of the year, that's what we're going to talk about today. We're talking about what goes on at the gas pump and what changes are coming or what will be coming at the fuel dispenser. And today we have our guest, Cara Gunderson, and she's with Citgo. She's going to talk about some of the things that are related to chip and pin EMV. That's a lot of code words, but trust us, she'll take us through it, and we'll understand it all on the other side. So welcome, Cara.
Thank you. How are you guys today?
Very good, thank you. Now, what we want to talk about today is what's called EMV. And in Washington, D.C., we have a lot of acronym soup here. So why don't you start off by telling us what EMV is and how it affects people at the gas pump?
Sure. So EMV stands for EuroPay, MasterCard, and Visa, because that is the chip card, or what people call the chip and pin card. Some people call it smart cards. It's actually the credit and debit cards that have the little chip in it. And it first was started in Europe, hence the name EuroPay, MasterCard, and Visa. And what EMV is doing is it makes a much more secure transaction for the cardholder themselves and actually helps reduce fraud for merchants. The EMV that we are seeing is, and we're all familiar with the different dates. We saw indoor EMV, October 1st of 2015, and we're very excited because the outdoor or EMV or the exception for automated fuel dispensers was extended for 3 years. So now our new date is October 1st of 2020. And I think that that's really going to help folks who were saving their money to upgrade for EMV. We're still waiting for the point-of-sale software to get to the point where they can support outdoor EMV. We're still rolling out indoor EMV. And so these extra 3 years, I think, are really going to make a big difference and a big impact for those of us in the petroleum industry with the automated fuel dispensers.
Now, one of you mentioned indoor and outdoor. Now, people are maybe familiar with a chip and pin. It's where you stick you don't swipe your card inside the store, and those retailers are required to have those inside the store effective last October, right?
Correct. The card brands, meaning MasterCard, Visa, American Express, and Discover, as well as the debit networks, will tell you that it's not actually a mandate, but it's called a counterfeit liability shift. And what that means is that prior to October 1st of 2015, which you had just alluded to, the card issuing banks, meaning the banks that actually issue consumers those cards, were absorbing that counterfeit liability. So let me give you an example. So merchants, in my mind, experience two different kinds of fraud. So they experience lost and stolen cards, which we're all familiar with, and chargebacks associated with those. But until October 1st of 2015, those card issuing banks were actually absorbing the fraud that went along with any counterfeit cards that were reproduced and used at locations. So when we say counterfeit cards, most often the case is that your card is still in your wallet as a consumer, but somebody has been able to obtain the data and then has made a counterfeit card. Like for me, I live in Texas, but I had somebody using my card at a grocery store in California. So obviously they had made a counterfeit card of mine, and that's the liability that the banks had been absorbing until the October 1st of 2015. So what they said is back in 2011, all the card brands got together and said, we really want to have the United States adopt EMV because we are really the last sophisticated country globally to adopt EMV. And so what that date means is that if you don't accept EMV at your retail location, then the card issuing banks have that right to shift the liability from themselves for that counterfeit card to you as the merchant.
So in terms of the implementation for the fuel retailing industry, obviously we have the inside the store terminals that need to be upgraded to accept the new smart cards, the harder to counterfeit or maybe near impossible to counterfeit cards. And then we have to update the units at the dispensers. Is that really, the whole technology that goes into allowing that technology to be implemented at the dispenser, is that what has prompted the extended implementation timeline? And can you kind of walk us through how closely did the retail community and the card brands actually work into coming up with this extension of implementation plan?
Sure. So from what I understand, the card issuing banks, the card brands themselves, the Visa, MasterCard, Amex, and Discover, were fairly unaware of the complexities that happen within the petroleum industry. So, for instance, all of our transactions go through a central point of sale system inside the store, but most were unfamiliar with how the infrastructure is set up. Meaning that if you swipe your card, or in the case of EMV, if you're going to what we call dip the card or insert your card into the EMV reader, all of those transactions feed back into the store, into the central point of sale system, and from there it is transmitted out. But because of that complex system and the entire infrastructure that we have, the card brands were unaware of the complexities, like I just had mentioned, and so we have done a lot of educating and just sitting down and having real frank discussions with the card brands to help them understand how complex the petroleum payment industry really is.
And it's complex from a couple different angles. First off, inside the store, you're largely dealing with weather that's 72 degrees, low humidity, and fluorescent lighting. Mm-hmm. At the pump, you have to be everywhere from minus 50 to about 100, and rain, snow, sleet, all kinds of environments, and it has to work right. That's one element. The other element is if you think about the typical convenience store, say a smaller store, there's one in-store reader, maybe two, and then you look at the gas pumps. Every dispenser has to have one of those readers, so you're talking about 10, 12, 20, 30 different readers at a store, and that gets incredibly complex in terms of reconfiguring all those systems, because I guess in some convenience stores, that's more terminal readers than you'd have in a supermarket.
That is correct. We just did some multiplying recently and came up with a figure based on some of the NACS State of the Industry reports and some of the research that you all at NACS have been doing, but the terminal readers just outside alone are approximately 1.4 million in quantity. So to your point, that's a heck of a lot more than what we're seeing, even some of the big box retailers. So if you've got an average of 6 dispensers, meaning 12 fueling positions, that's 12 terminals just outside that you have to replace, and you may have 2 or 3 more pin pads inside your store than you're replacing. Because in the EMV world, they actually call those terminals. We happen to call them pin pads. But yeah, so we've got about 1.4 million terminals or pin pads to replace the dispenser.
Now, Cara, I've received questions over the last couple of years as I deal with the fuels industry a lot in terms of what fuels are coming to market, and the biofuels industry is really interested in boosting the level of biofuels, especially ethanol and gasoline. So they've seen this transition to EMV as an opportunity in their mind. They said, hey, John, everybody's got to replace their dispensers to handle this new EMV, so why don't they just go ahead and replace all their dispensers with higher ethanol-rated dispensers? And my understanding is you don't necessarily have to replace the dispenser. You may just replace the CRIN. What are you seeing, and what's your expectation in terms of how retailers might be able to move forward in terms of evolving their systems to accept the new cards? Is it going to require a dispenser replacement, or is it just going to be software and hardware for the CRIN replacement?
It's a little bit of both. So you have to first have the point-of-sale software that's going to be able to take and accept and process those EMV cards at the fuel dispenser, just like you did for inside the store. So, but to your point is that, we definitely have to have the hardware also out at the fuel dispenser. And there's a basic school of thought, but then it varies slightly. And what I mean by that is that folks, like as you just alluded to, folks either have to replace the fuel dispenser or they could use a retrofit kit. And some of that depends on, your depreciation schedule. It depends on, also if your dispenser is right around that 7 to 10 year mark. Maybe your dispenser is only 5 years old, but it may not be working properly, and so on and so forth. So I think you need to assess what's going to work best for you. If your fuel dispenser is right on the cusp, and to your point, about the biodiesel, there could be other things that you want to add at that particular time. The thing that I always tell our customers is, don't just meet the mandate, but look beyond the mandate. What sort of things do you want to accomplish?
And
part of what EMV provides us in petroleum that we really haven't seen until now is it really brings a digital platform to petroleum that allows us to all of a sudden do all kinds of different programs. Whether it's loyalty, we can add more data security for encryption. There's different consumer experiences, enhanced consumer experiences, things like that we can do if we, now that we have the 3-year extension, we can now just not meet the mandate, but we can exceed that and look ahead to things that our marketing groups want to do, and to your point, even add some different types of fuel.
So if there's anything to stress, that the 3-year extension doesn't mean don't do something for 2 years or take your foot off the gas on this. It's a really good time to look at what you need to do to adhere to it, because this is not going away. It's going to happen. And I was just thinking, as much of a headache it is for the average convenience store, I'm thinking about that poor IT guy at Buc-ee's in one of those Texas stores
yes.
with 120 dispensers. I don't know what their fueling locations. I have no idea what that guy's doing. But
we are hearing that, to your point, folks are just not taking their foot off the gas, pun intended there. But the point of sale vendors have all reached out to myself, my peers, others like yourself in the industry, and so have the fuel dispenser manufacturers, saying we fully intend on meeting the original dates because we want people to implement. And same thing, we're here, and those folks in return are also sharing that they're hearing from major retailers and other folks that fully plan on implementing as soon as possible. The fear here is that, as I mentioned earlier, the U.S. is the last major country globally to adopt EMV. So as the folks and retailers more fully accept EMV and there's a wider acceptance, there's lesser places and fewer places for people to go with those counterfeit cards to be used. And us with automated fuel dispensers, or what we call AFDs, are going to be the last man standing here. So we really are encouraging early adoption, because I think we need to do early adoption to keep abreast with our competitors. Like I said, there are several major retailers that fully plan on implementing even prior to the 2017 October 1st date. And we also want to make sure that you're keeping your customers, with all the data breaches and the card breaches that we've seen previously, consumers have become exceedingly aware that the EMV transaction is much more secure for them as a cardholder. It really helps reduce fraud. For us at fuel dispensers, it actually helps mitigate some of the skimming. Will the skimming go away forever? Not completely, but I think it definitely helps us in that respect. But also, we need to make sure that customers are going to be looking that we've met the customer demand, because customers are going to be looking for places where they can use their EMV cards, because they know that it's safer for them as a consumer.
And Cara,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think you're raising a good point, the whole consumer experience and the consumer protection element, because as a consumer, so people can't counterfeit my card. That's a great thing. But I've also been putting in my zip code at the dispenser, and I may not know why I'm doing that from a retail side, because it almost eliminates some fraud activities in terms of stolen cards. But as a consumer, let's say I lose my card, because one of the things I've always been concerned about is you put your card in the dispenser, and then you do this, you do that. I think stores have told me that once a week somebody drives off with the nozzle still in their car. Consumers get distracted, and they drive off, and they leave their card in the dispenser. What is going to protect that customer from the next customer using their card up until it's reported stolen? And how are the consumer going to, what other elements are in place, what other elements do retailers have to put in place for skimming protection as well to make sure that customer is protected to the best of our ability?
Sure. We do see a lot of zip code verification, or what we call address verification service. You might hear referred to as AVS. But that zip code verification definitely helps the merchant, help mitigate some of that fraud if it were a lost or stolen or now even counterfeit card. And with EMV, depending on the configuration and what is available to you, we expect that for the most part, if you have an EMV card that is issued with a PIN, you will not be prompted for your zip code. However, if your card is issued without a PIN, you will probably be prompted for a zip code to continue help mitigating that fraud. And obviously, if you still have a magnetic stripe card, you will still also be able to, you'll still be asked for your zip code. But another couple of things that you can do as a merchant to help mitigate, especially the skimming, is I really encourage folks to do checks of their inside and the outside of their dispensers at every shift. So, for instance, if you are checking for receipt paper, especially if you are in a very high volume area, you want to be checking for receipt paper, during shift change or something similar every 4 to 6 hours. And when you're checking for that, you obviously have to open up the dispenser. I know that there are some alarms and alerts, but the best thing to do is to open up the dispenser, because that way you can look for skimmers at the same time. Folks have even gone so far as to take photos of the inside and the outside of their dispensers, so that no matter which store employee is looking at the inside and outside of that dispenser, they can take that photo that they've put in page protectors and a 3-ring binder and compare it to what they're actually seeing, so that they know what to look for, because skimmers come in all shapes and sizes.
Well, that's a good tip right there. I like the idea of using your phone. Everybody has a phone. It's a camera, taking a picture, documenting, staying on top of that, and kind of forcing the discipline. And it's probably going to be the same thing with customers, as John was saying earlier, that customers will have to kind of develop a routine, because when you're using a chip and PIN card inside the store, you hear that beep. It sounds kind of ominous. There's a clerk right there saying, oh, by the way, you can take your card out now. At the pump, it's much noisier because you're right next to a road and there is no clerk there. So that's going to have to be something that consumers are going to have to start just developing that pattern. Time to pull the card out. That is completed. That's one element. But take us through the costs. I guess there's two sets of costs. And you had mentioned it's not quite a mandate as the way they say it, but it's basically, you don't have to do this, but you don't have any guarantee we're going to pay you. So it's kind of a mandate from the respect if you want to get paid. But what are the costs that the industry will incur looking at full compliance?
I believe the latest calculations that I've seen, and this is obviously compliments of the folks, from Connexus and NACS, and that is right around $7 billion are the latest stats. And that's based on the average age of the dispenser and so on and so forth. So I think that's a pretty decent number to have. And, I know a lot of folks really get focused on the cost of it, but I really think that early adopters especially will have the ability not only to maintain their market share, but I think they have the ability to obtain additional market share, because you've got consumers, like we mentioned earlier, are really looking for that place that accepts EMV cards at the fuel dispenser. And so therefore, I think that you have the ability to obtain additional customers and additional market share, especially if you're an early adopter. But yeah, I mean, the cost is not cheap, but I think as we saw, especially in Canada is the only other market closest to the U.S. that actually has almost a similar number of pay-at-the-pump facilities as we do in the U.S., and folks that were not going to adopt started seeing those chargebacks come through and quickly started eating into their profits.
You know, Jeff, I think it's important that if the industry is investing $7 billion in security, the other things that the industry has been doing, I mean, gas stations and convenience stores are often reported in the press as being the source of problems with card skimmers and everything like that. And I think it's important that, you know, our audience recognizes that organizations like NACS, Connexus that Cara referenced, which is the technology standards, and really is the representative of the technology and payments program supporting NACS, are dedicated and spending a lot of time and effort to make sure that retailers are well-versed and educated in how to protect their customers and protect themselves, working with the card brands to make sure implementation is done appropriately and timely and in a responsible fashion. There is a major investment in time and resources on the part of this industry to make sure that customers are well protected and feel confident when they go to fill up their car, that they're protected and that their retailer is really watching out for them.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. You know, some of the other things, too, that would be beneficial, and I'd mentioned, you know, don't just look at the mandate, but I guess I kind of want to circle back to some of the other enhancements that you could make. In Europe, we see a lot of folks going from EMV into mobile, and certainly when you're making your fuel dispenser upgrades, don't overlook the fact that you may want to add NFC or near field communications card acceptance, meaning I call it like tap and pay, where you can use Apple Pay or Samsung Pay at the fuel dispenser. And so as folks, and we know millennials really like to adopt new technology, you know, heck, even some of those baby boomers might be very interested in paying with their mobile phones, especially when it's 50 below zero. I'd rather tap and pay than I would, you know, get out a card. And so again, think of those types of strategies, because it isn't just meeting the mandate and the costs associated with it, but again, it's really catapulting the petroleum industry into the digital age and being able to compete with other markets and other segments.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Cara. And you've been involved in Connexus. Can you give us their website where people can check out more information on technology?
Sure. It's www.connexus.org, which is CONEXXUS.
Thank you very much, and thank you for listening to Convenience Matters.
You've been listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NACS. For more information about the National Association of Convenience Stores, go to nacsonline.com.